So this is Frosthaven, built by the community. I'm Ben, and a little bit about me. I've told some folks here already. My academic background is UNC Chapel Hill, so I'm a Tar Heel. I have a couple generations of Tar Heels in my family, so if sports are your thing, we can talk about that, I guess. I consider myself a little bit of a modern Luddite, and I'll say more about that a little later in this talk, and I'm also working on some writing to really pin those thoughts down, but I'm happy to talk about that later. Like Sid said, I do a lot of work with Vim and Git and the shell, and that's kind of how I put things together. So if you have questions about that or want to chat about it, that's another thing. And I believe that simple questions often have complex answers, and there's some more about what that means on my website. This is the part where I have to say, I'm here as a person, I work for a company that has nothing to do with this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I do also work with a Racketeer, Brian Adkins, who pays me money to write Racket code, so it does exist. The talk. This is based on my experience building what I think is a large program, and we use it weekly. I'm going to have to skim things. There's a lot of detail that I could get into on any single one of these slides. If you are interested in more of that detail, let's chat later. I'll be available online, like Sid said, and I'll be here for this weekend. The talk is also, I think there's a lot of things we could say about community. This talk is not about looking backwards at other things. It's about looking forwards at what community and collaboration looks like for the future. And so that's what I'm going to try to focus on. First, I think I should tell you a little bit about Frosthaven. There are extremely minor spoilers ahead, so if you are the person that cares about those, close your eyes, but you probably won't need to. Frosthaven is a board game, and this is what playing it sometimes looks like. It's a legacy game, which means that we modify the game as we go, and that impacts future game sessions. So we play scenarios, we play missions. It's a little bit like an RPG that you might play on a video game or with pen and paper. It has board pieces, it has tiles, it has characters, it has monsters, it has all of those things. We're extremely fortunate that we have a player who likes to paint miniature figurines, so we have lots of painted minis, which is really exciting on the table. And we have to keep track of a lot of things when we play this game. You'll see some of these images are maybe even a little cluttered for a large table. You can see some tokens that we put out. You can see cards being played in the background. And you can see, well, I'll jump forward a little bit. You can see in the background of this picture a tray that holds tokens. There are 3 or 4 more of those, and it's a lot of tokens. It's a lot of information to keep track of. Each one of the monsters on this field has statistics we need to know, their move and attack values. Each one individually has health that we need to know about so that we can make informed strategic decisions. We have our own things to keep track of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here's another similar diagram, and there's just more. This is an early picture of actually using the Frosthaven Manager to play a game. You can see it in the slides in the back. Are we getting a question already? Yes, it is. Yes, it's one way to track that. So in the background here, we managed to get the app running on a projector, and I'll say more about what the app does in a minute, but for various reasons, this is not the way we play today, but I just thought it was a neat picture. This is what the app looks like today. And so it's trying to present all that information that we would normally have to manage by putting individual tokens all over the map for different things, or flipping cards, or a handful of other things in a pretty condensed way. So we have some characters on the screen, Trundle and Timothy. We have some monsters like frozen corpses, and there are many different monsters that are frozen corpses on the map, each with their own individual properties. There are elements that create magical effects for certain abilities that we have to know about and track different states of, et cetera, right? There's a lot here. It does support dark mode. Thank you, Robbie and other folks. And thank you, Jay McCarthy and other folks, you can do this from your phone. So when I'm sitting at the game with my laptop running the application, my players are usually on their phone or a tablet, and that also supports dark mode. But they're looking at the same things that I'm looking at, just in a different format, and they want to be able to interact with it too. So now is the part where I tell you a little bit more about the thing. This application, like I said, manages all of that state in a way that works for us, that makes sense to us, as opposed to having, we probably save an hour or more of playtime just by going through a computer system as opposed to doing some things physically. I started working on this about 2.5 years ago. It's now roughly 15,000 lines of stuff, code, documentation, tests, etc. We played our first game with it about a year after I started working on it. The web server stuff, so you can play on your phone, was added a couple months later and is now the largest single part of the program. We've played probably 50 games and won about 41 times, so that's not bad. And we've had a lot of fun. This is the kind of game that creates stories that last. We still make jokes about things from 2 or 3 years ago, and that's this kind of game. I should say why build it. If you've played something like Gloomhaven, you might know that there's an official app that was supported by the developers of the board game to be developed so that you could play Gloomhaven in this same way, without all the tokens and with a helper, a computer program that helps. Something like that was going to be true for Frosthaven, and there was some breakdown in the communications between the app developer and the board game publisher, and the future of that was very uncertain. This was back in about 2022. I get to thinking, I could do that. Surely it's not so hard. It is, spoiler, but it's also fun, and I think it's approachable even for folks that don't have much experience, like I didn't before I got into this. Anyway, the future of that app was uncertain. Turned out later there are other community apps that do something similar to what I do, and they have different trade-offs. I get the pleasure of my players telling me that there are things that the official apps now do that mine doesn't, and there are things that mine does that the official app doesn't do, and they like mine better, so that works for me. It was also a great excuse to try some graphical programming. I haven't done really any GUI programming since like the early 2010s, when I thought I was learning how to program with C#. That's where I come from. So I hadn't done that in a while, and I'd heard Bogdan's GUI Easy Talk a couple of years ago at, I believe, RacketCon, and it seemed like a good excuse to start working on something that was exciting again. And so that's what I really mean. The joy of building software, I had enjoyed building programs in Racket. One of the things I think Racket does really well is the complexity of building graphical systems, web servers, pictures, you name it, is not gone, but it's more accessible to my brain in the way that I think because of Racket and the people that contribute to it and make libraries for it. So, yeah. I'll talk a little bit about some of the features that are in Frosthaven. This is especially where I'm going to skim. It's portable GUI, and that's thanks to Racket GUI Easy, Rako Distribute, GitHub Actions, all the things. And so thank you to anybody here that's had their hands in that. Also, thank you to folks that built Racket Serialize and Racket Facile. That's one of our favorite features, is that we can save the game in the middle of playing it. I can go fix bugs, and then we can pick up where we left off because we saved the game. And so that's powered by, well, the Serialize and Facile libraries. We have an undo feature, which is huge because, well, humans aren't perfect, and so we sometimes type more things than we mean to, or we hit a button that we didn't mean to, or what have you. This is a huge hack under the cover, so I'm not going to say much about it other than I get notified of state changes and then save states, and it's kind of a kludge, but it works. The web server thing is especially exciting. When we first started playing, because we hadn't played in a while, I had no conception of what it was going to be like for me to sit down with a laptop and nobody else at the table to know what was going on in the game without me reading it out to them back and forth over and over and over again. You learn that one very quickly when you have a community of players that sit next to you and play with you every week. So this was a really fun feature to build. It saved me a lot of hassle, and it's been a lot more fun for our players. The short version is the same observable subscription notification that powers undo powers this web server. I get notified of changes in the state, and I send off server events to the client, server sent events to the client, which has 50 lines of JavaScript to do updates on the page to say this is what's changed and here's the new values. The reverse side of that interaction is HTML buttons that send post requests to the server and then process that change. There's some tricky details to get right there in terms of having the callbacks process in the right GUI thread, in the right event loop, in the right callback. But those features exist and can be done so that it's all sort of makes sense. And then we're at RacketCon, so hashlang. We have loot cards, we have monster data, we have area of effect diagrams, we have all the things, and you need some way to notate those that's more rational than baking it into the program. So this is one of the things that my app does that I don't think many do. You can play with custom monsters because that's just another hashlang that the program can read and deal with during play. So there's an example. It's documented, which is a thing. It takes a lot of time to maintain, but it's good. It's both a user manual and a programmer reference, which helps me when I've forgotten things, but it also means that as I get ready to move away from my playgroup and teach my other players how to run the app for themselves, I can kind of point them to this and say, what questions do you have? This is built on Scribble and GitHub Actions and Pages and is also linked there. I'll make sure the slides go out. But one of the things I want to say, having gone through all those slides, is many of the people here have helped me work on those things or have worked on the libraries that power them, so thank you. There are at least 2 commit co-authors on this code base, one of which was for the Chi migration that involved some changing in some semantics that required some tweaks. I'd been writing this from within Vim, so I did promise there would be some Vim in the talk, and so that means that I say a special thank you to the folks that work on the language server and the Dr. Racket support. There's been some renewed interest in some of the plugins I maintain that I use to write this, so that's been exciting. I've also asked dozens of discourse and Discord Q&As and gotten really, really helpful answers. So thank you to the folks that have participated in those communities and made that such a helpful space. So that's what I mean when I say built by the community. I've got a group of players that give me great feedback on where things go wrong and where things go right. And if you haven't tried that in a long time, go find it. It's really, really wonderful to have a community that says, this is how we take this to the next level. And you all, right? Everybody that's here virtually, everybody that's in Discord, Discourse, Slack, which has some activity, I guess, occasionally. We wouldn't get to do the things we do without your support. I do want to switch gears, though, and talk a little bit more about community, aside from just building the Frosthaven Manager. Brian Cantrell of Oxide was on a Software Misadventures podcast recently, and I'll censor a little bit. He said, everyone needs to get their butts handed to them intellectually. And I mean it when I say that in the best way possible. The Racket community hands my intellectual butt to me a little bit, right? There's a lot of really hard problems that Racket is solving, and a lot of really smart people working on those problems, and I'm over here just trying to play my board game. So that's really, really nice. I think that I have learned a lot from this community and grown a lot because of this community, and I appreciate you all for that. I also think, Brian said something like this on the same podcast, that we have a lot of adults that don't behave very well in this world. And Racketeers, by and large, behave really well. I will give credit to community moderators, but I will also give credit to all of you who behave like adults. It's extremely refreshing to have a place to go where folks are nice to each other and helpful and also challenge each other. I think the beauty of all of this is that I enjoy programming Racket, but it's not just about programming with Racket, it's about programming with Racketeers, right? It's about community that works together and solves hard problems. The next little bit, when I said I was working on writing some things down to explain what I mean when I say I'm a modern Luddite, this is a rough draft of some of those ideas, so just be warned. This is not fully fleshed out at all. One of the things that I think is special about community is the way that we share knowledge with each other. I think of Alex Harsanyi, who's like lessons from large projects, building custom GUI components or building maps and data frames and all of those things, right? That's kind of an inspiration to me of a way that we can share our knowledge with each other. And I didn't plan this, but talking about building knowledge as building artifacts, right? Like from Jerry and House Talk, that to me is one thing that's really, really special about community. Having built Frosthaven Manager, I have a lot of examples to link to now of things of how not to do things and how to do things. And that's been really, really nice for me. I also think it's important that this community thinks about what it means to be responsible consumers of software, in particular open source software, and how we steward that. I think of projects like Chi and Abe, which I've been loosely involved with for a while, but there are plenty of other projects. And it's really nice to see this community support each other in ways that may be time, financial, expertise, knowledge, et cetera. I think that those are all super important things and things that this community does pretty well. So this is the part where I put myself a little on the spot. How do I return that favor, right? You've heard me say thank you a lot today. I have some plans of some things I'd like to do to share back to the community. But if you have ideas, whether that's for me specifically or for this community in general, of how we can support each other better, I think I'd like to hear them, and I'd encourage you to share them. My personal plans at the moment include to extract some of the things out of Frosthaven Manager that I think might be useful more broadly. So those are some GUI easy things that don't ship with GUI easy by default, but that I've kind of built around to make managing Frosthaven easier. Sid's really excited because I'm talking about curlyq, which is a syntax sugar for Chi, let's say. But ... right? Fill in the blank. What would be helpful to you? What are ways that people can help you out in the same ways that you're helping other people? Another thing that I think makes community special is this notion of democratizing software. So I think community makes room for more, and that's more people, but also more different kinds of people. And I think that's something this community does well. I'd like us to think about, though, I'm going to lean on the wizard book a little bit. We are technologists, and that has given us a certain, in this world, elite status of being the people that are able to make the computers do the thing that we want. How do we bring more people into that? 40 years of magic, I couldn't have planned this any better. I've been thinking about that word a lot. I've been thinking about that word thanks to some reading I've been doing, Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology, Cory Doctorow's articles and books, as well as several others. I've been thinking about the word magic from the sense of joy, how joyful it is to work on Racket, how joyful it is to program computers, how magical that experience can feel, how we are much like wizards, but also about how that can be used as a way to put up walls between those who have the magic and those who don't. And I would encourage us to think about what it would take for us to share that magic with others, to break those walls down and say, let's bring you in. Let's give you control back over your digital life. I have a friend who said to me recently, one of the things I hate about X technology is I don't have control over my computer. I don't have control over my digital life. If that's ever resonated with you, you in this room are in a position where you have more control over your digital life than many, many, many people. Think about what it would take for you to share that digital control. Help educate people so that they can take their own digital control back. I think that's important. It's something I've been thinking about, and if that interests you, let's chat. I think Racket's educational roots give it a really good head start in this area, and I can't even pretend to speak to the challenges that you all deal with on a semesterly, daily, monthly, yearly basis. And I think that that's a large part of what makes Racket so joyful, and it has made me think about some of these ideas. Let's dream a little bigger. What's next? How do we put more people in control of their digital lives? So if you take nothing else away from this, I like board games, and this question is really important. What's next for me? There's some challenges with Frosthaven that I'd like to tackle, primarily some performance issues when you have deeply nested trees of data and you do functional immutable updates, and those are connected to a deeply nested tree of renderers for graphical objects. You have garbage problems, and you have performance problems for what should otherwise be a relatively real-time application. Thinking about what to do with that, part of my challenge I'm running into is how do I identify the problems and where they are and fix them? So if folks have ideas on what that looks like, I'd love to know so that we can share those things out with more people. I'm also working on a program for my wife's nonprofit, actually. They have a a sort of an optimization problem where they take students and they would like to assign them to discussion groups, and they would like to mix the students in certain ways based on certain attributes. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but they're looking for good enough. And with the number of students they have and the number of discussion groups they have, it's an incredibly large state space, right? They do this by writing the names out on note cards and shuffling them around, and then comparing with a spreadsheet to see how well they balanced the attributes they're trying to mix. That sounds like a job for computers, right? One of the things I'd like to give them is a way to visualize those assignments and those attribute mixings a little better. I'd also like to give them a way to do some automatic search to say, let the computer think for a minute and see if it can find something that looks good enough to you. But this has to run on low-end consumer hardware. It's a nonprofit in the United States, so financial problems are real. So it's really important to figure out how to make that automatic search sort of resumable later when the computer has more resources available to it. So these are some of the things I'm thinking about for what comes next for me. And I think that's the end of my slides. So the other thing that comes next, what's next for me is you all, right? I said earlier, what can I do to help you? What can other people do to help you? Think about those ideas, share them with me, share them with others, share them with each other, and let's keep this community going the way that it is.
All right, it's time for questions. Jeff?
So you said, how could you help? You could write a book. It doesn't have to be a big book, but someone recently had a website on how he published a book using pollen. And I'm using that as an example to help a flight instructor write a book about how not to crash gliders. And it's very helpful to have a working example. So just a suggestion. Get a little small book.
Challenge accepted. I'll see you in 2 decades.
So another suggestion, very different, is to make videos or maybe live streams of people playing Frosthaven. And Racket is not front and center with this. It just shows up in the details. But here's people having fun, and this technology happens to be part of it.
Excellent suggestion. Thank you.
Do you anticipate this mixed reality kind of thing generalizing? And it sounds like you've already talked about that a little bit towards the end. But what other settings do you think you can use this for?
Yeah, my wife and I play a lot of board games. I mean a lot. So I've started thinking about, are some of the ideas here applicable to other games that we play? The good news is most games don't have quite the level of complexity that Frosthaven has that really demands this extra solution for folks that don't like managing fiddly bits on a table. The flip side of that, though, was building the interactions between an application that I can run on my laptop and that my friends can interact with on their computer or on their phones and tablets, where the only thing that mediates that interaction is their Wi-Fi network. Like there's no extra servers, there's no AWS costs, there's no nothing. That was really fun and has made me think a little bit more about what other things would benefit from that kind of dual interactive treatment in the same room. I don't have a good answer, but I hope to make that technology a little more accessible by extracting some of those pieces. So
yeah, just to follow up on that, the reason I ask is there are some games that are like board games but are video games, and this one seems like it's a third option where you have the board game but you have a computer involved. So
yeah, it's a little bit of both.
Yeah,
it's a little bit of both.
Okay, actually, just going off of what you said. So, I'm Ashton. Again, hi. When I was growing up, there's a space center. You'd play Star Trek, not really Star Trek, but it was Star Trek, just not licensed right. One summer, I actually landed a gig working for this place, and I was heartbroken to see that it was not, in fact, a simulator behind, but some guy pushing buttons. So it was a little bit more like a tabletop role-playing thing, but just with cool things. So something like this would be super. You're making me think of I should build a cool simulator that I should always want. I'm just curious. This is a more technical question. How are you sending the events? If you have 2 people hit an increment button at the same time, what happens?
If you'd asked me that a week ago, I would have had a different answer. I had to fix a bug recently. The short version is the web server processes things with threads and continuation. So I think it's concurrent but not parallel, in the sense that I don't think there are multiple processes involved, but there are multiple Racket threads involved. What I do is I take those callbacks from the web server module and I kick them back over to the GUI side of things. And I let the GUI event loop queue them up so that they process sequentially, even though they've been queued up concurrently. That makes reasoning a lot easier. A week ago, they were not actually sequential in the way that I hoped they would be, and that's because I didn't use queue callback. I tried to cheat around it, and that's a bad idea, so don't do that.
Awesome, thank you.
We have a troll question from an individual named Dominic Pantuchek, and he asks, when will application screenshots get included in the Frosthaven documentation?
On the plane on the way home.
All right, another question.
Hello, I'm Ethan. You said the local web server had grown to be the largest part of the code base. Could you talk a little bit how that happened? Was it like code has moved from other parts into the local web server, or it has just grown much faster than every other part?
A little bit of the latter. The graphical interface has not had to change much over the last 12 months or so. There's been some new features that get added slowly, things like that. A lot of the web server's growth has been kind of catching up to the graphical application side. So there's a lot of things that I used to be able to do only on my laptop when we were playing, and that slows things down because now my players have to tell me, hey, I need you to do this, hey, I need you to do that, hey, I need you to do this other thing, and there's sort of one point of failure, basically, right? Programmers know that's a bad idea, so let's push that work out to them. My favorite thing I get to say now is, you can do that yourself. And so a lot of it has been not duplicating code necessarily, but creating the structures to, think about different presentation. Your phone screen is a lot smaller than your laptop screen, so think about how do I present things that are actions for the game to my players in a way that they can actually interact with and aren't doing this to make it readable, and then B, wiring up those actions to GUI callbacks so that the state actually gets changed and reflected across all the different devices that are connected. I also have not yet figured out a good way to refactor it in such a way that there are appropriate siphoned off, siloed off sub-pieces that make sense. And so that's the other part of why it's really the largest module at the moment. A lot of the other modules are a little more self-contained and more of a tree hierarchy, and the web server is sort of just one big blob of a file. So.
Nice. I have a feeling there are more questions for you, but I think that's all we have time for, so let's give it up for Ben.